Mark, thanks for joining Yahoo Finance. I appreciate you giving us the time here. So this year's Goalkeepers report, what are some of the top takeaways here?
Well, the main thing of the report, and the reason we set it up 5 years ago and report every year, is really to try and outline the amazing progress that the world has been making on poverty reduction, on reducing preventable child mortality, and all these key indicators which you often get hidden and not understood. And unfortunately, the sad news is this year we're saying that COVID actually has had a massive effect on that and put a lot of that into reverse. That we've seen, after 2 decades in which we saw more than 1 billion people moving out of extreme poverty, and that's poverty meaning your income is only $1.90 a day. We're talking really poor. We've now had 31 million more people moving back into poverty. We have wealthy countries, high-income countries like the United States, are pretty well back to their pre-pandemic per capita incomes, but only 1 in 3 developing countries is going to be on track to be back to its 2019 levels next year. And so the main message of the report is that there have been some really serious consequences, and the world needs to take action. But the good news is there are actions that we can take, from expanding vaccine access to building on some new innovations in health and financial inclusion and other areas.
Yeah, let's start in terms of taking action. Let's start with poverty, because in the report it notes that the pandemic has reversed 4 years of progress, I would imagine, on improving poverty. Let's split it up into countries. In terms of the U.S., how many years has the pandemic set us behind in improving on poverty in the country?
What happens is it's difficult to aggregate up, because what you're talking about is sort of baseline measures on, again, extreme poverty. So the global measure of extreme poverty is that below $2 a day, essentially. And then when you're looking at per capita income, you're looking at averages. So in a country like the United States, what you have is setbacks with particular groups. So, for example, we know that more women than men lost jobs as a result of COVID, and we haven't had a full recovery of jobs yet, even though income and asset prices are much higher. Globally, what we're talking about, again, is these people moving into the extreme poverty means you literally don't have enough resources to feed yourself or your family on a given day. And that's why we use that as a sort of benchmark indicator. And that's the bit that's been the big reversal in some of the poorest countries in the world across Asia and Africa and Latin America.
And Mark, in terms of taking action, again, let's just stay on the U.S. here. And you mentioned the rise in income levels and asset prices such as stocks is one way to take action and improve extreme poverty in the country. Is it through redistribution of wealth? Does it make the case that, yes, we should raise taxes on corporations and the wealthy even more to help solve this?
Our co-chairs, Bill and Melinda Gates, are on the record as saying that they are comfortable paying more taxes if needed. But the real message for the foundation is what we do and look at is about what are we investing in as a country. So in the United States, our biggest area of focus is education, looking at K-12 education, post-secondary education, and trying to say that you've got to make sure that's the surest platform leverage to get people, standing on their own feet and, not living in poverty, to be able to provide opportunities for themselves and their families. And we've seen massive shortcomings of that in recent years, particularly for communities of color and low-income students. And there are huge, again, silver linings, we think, available in things like post-secondary education and massive expansion of digital learning that have come out of it. They were a forced experiment coming out of the COVID crisis where everyone had to go online. But we've seen some really exciting examples of the kind of investments that we think could transform the education system going forward. So I think it's much more about making those. Many of them are public investments, but they can be philanthropic and private investments as well.
Have the initiatives from the Biden administration, obviously here in the U.S., has that been helpful in improving or just helping the goals of the foundation being met?
Well, certainly some of the resources that are going into areas like education, have the potential to be incredibly helpful. There's significant resources going in to the K-12 system, for example, as schools start. And so a lot will depend on, how effectively those are spent and used and what lessons we can learn from the past. But it's, the combination of efforts, it's sort of mapping. One of the investments we did make in the United States during the pandemic is anything called Opportunity Insights, which is a website you can go on, which helps track where the biggest economic impacts were by district and county level in the United States. And so that allows cities and states and governments to sort of better target some of the interventions they're doing. So it's not just resources on their own, it's how the resources are used and targeted in the most effective manner.
And the report goes really into a great length about the need to invest in women. Talk to us about that.
Yes, so that is, at two levels. One is it is very clear that women have been disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic and the economic sense. That there are 13 million more jobs globally that have been lost by women that have not been recovered, and they have the greater burden of caregiving in households, and particularly when kids were forced into work from home and other related issues. It's just had a significant knock-on impact that's been very detrimental to women in the workforce and general empowerment. And so what we think needs to happen going forward is you having a much more intentional focus on both supporting the needs of women, when this is a global issue as well as a national issue, in key areas like childcare, in key areas around providing some of the social and other supports that are needed to help there be strong, effective members of the economic community and just engaging. And so that's one of the reasons why we have such a strong focus on women.
Are there certain goals, the global goals for 2030, are there goals that will not be hit because of the pandemic?
Well, the risk is at the moment, as our report shows, is that most goals have been moved off track. So this set of ambitious goals, from everything from financial inclusion to access to sanitation, to the poverty eradication, to improvements in education. And currently, nearly all of those are either stagnant or set somewhat off track or at a worse trajectory than they were before. And so we need an acceleration. Now, the good news is we do actually have some exciting new tools available. So, for example, the breakthrough technology of the COVID response, which is mRNA vaccines, which, as the Gates Foundation, we were actually very early investors in mRNA at a time many people thought it would be a pipe dream, because we already saw the potential for it to be transformative for other diseases like HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And we think if those can be used and harnessed in the same way we've seen for COVID, we could see some dramatic improvements. And so it's some of those tools and innovations that make us excited and optimistic about the future.
The report, Mark, also goes into detail about vaccine inequality or inequity. What's the foundation's view on boosters? Should the U.S. gain access or have access or be able to take these booster shots, knowing full well there may be emerging markets that can't even get first doses of the vaccine out there?
These are very important, national debates and discussions that need to take place and be conducted by the relevant health authorities. We think it's very much possible to be, a both and to look at ways in which countries can look after the highest risk members of their own population and also contribute to important global response. But at the global level, the bottom line on numbers, which our report highlights, is we are in a situation where over 80% of vaccines to date have been distributed in high-income and upper-middle-income countries, and only 1% of vaccines have been distributed in low-income countries, and only less than 2% of the population of those low-income countries are vaccinated. So we're talking very large disparities that we think it is a priority to address.
Is there one country or two countries or three countries that are doing some of these initiatives better, or countries that are making strong progress on your goals and while others aren't?
This report looks at the global level deliberately. It doesn't go country by country, and it looks at the broader global trends because these are indeed global goals. What we do all the time, though, is look at models of countries that have been successful, and we're trying to learn how and where and what they did. So a country like Peru, for example, did and we highlighted this actually in our previous year's report, some great progress on stunting. Stunting is when you get malnutrition for children that affects brain development and health development that has long-term impacts, and you try and learn from their intervention, see how can we sort of spread that some countries have been doing much better. This year actually we highlight the West African country of Benin, which is a small country, but has a very high malaria burden, which is a huge cause of child death. And they did some very innovative work around how you digitize actually the spread of malaria bed nets. That's how you primarily prevent malaria, which is now a tool that we're taking up and with other partners to help spread across the world. So each of these, there are great examples in interventions in particular areas that we're constantly looking country by country and then finding ways to partner and try and scale those across other countries.
And Mark, are there new goals that are starting to emerge that you may add to your list, ultimately that have been caused because of the pandemic?
No, the goals themselves are actually, they're set in stone. They were approved by every country in the world at the United Nations, including the United States, in 2015. And what they set was a set of targets with a 2030 deadline. We've picked 18 of those as core ones. There are multiple goals which are in the back of our report because we see them as the critical proxies that tell you whether life is getting better or not. So you don't change the goal of poverty reduction because of the COVID pandemic, but you may change some of the approaches or interventions you do in order to respond. You don't change the goal of reducing under 5 preventable child deaths, but we can provide some new tools and approaches for how you tackle that. And that's, again, where something like the vaccines and the use of the mRNA vaccines becomes so exciting. And we've seen some other exciting new developments in the last year on digital education, in digital financial inclusion among poor communities, which we think we can actually build on and accelerate progress against those targets.
What is it like to run the foundation, or what has it been like to run the foundation over the past 18 months, Mark, when you have all these good initiatives that you want to achieve? You certainly have the financial backing to make these things possible, but the pandemic has been the ultimate wild card.
It's been a mixture of both huge frustration at the kind of setbacks we've seen because the progress has been so amazing over the last couple of decades, which are the decades that the foundation was formed in 2000. And during those 2 decades, we've seen almost, steady, unprecedented progress in all of the areas we work that's made us very excited. So to see a setback like this, is a huge thing. And it's a huge amount of additional, work. On the plus side, it's been very exciting to see the role the foundation can play because we've developed a lot of expertise over the years in, how you deal with infectious diseases, how you work with vaccines, how you work with vaccine distribution, how you deal with the knock-on effects. So in a way, it's a more receptive moment. The world often doesn't pay attention to health issues or health security, and boy, have they woken up now. And I think there's an opportunity for some really big new investments from the US and others for long-term security that will help make the US stronger and safer going forward, but are also a big global public good in surveillance, in vaccine development, and vaccine manufacturing, all these areas that everyone's become very familiar with.
And Mark, we were recently discussing the foundations on our shows here at Yahoo Finance, the foundation on our show. Warren Buffett recently retired from the foundation. Have you gotten any closer to finding a new trustee for him? What is that search looking like?
We're in the middle, as we announced after Warren stepped down. I'm working closely with Bill and Melinda. We're consulting with Warren as well. And so we're working through both, looking at what some of the best practices are across the field in terms of, overall governance of nonprofits and systems and structures, what special needs we may have because of our size and our global scope. And so we're still on track. We said we would be coming up with an announcement on a new board and a new structure and potential new members in early next year, and that's still the timeline we're working on.
So it's not just a matter of adding one person. I mean, it's hard to replace a Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
It is Warren Buffett. So you're looking at, is it more of a traditional board structure where you might have 12 to 15 people?
No, well, those I doubt will ever be as large as 12 to 15 people. No, as you say, Warren is an irreplaceable asset, but luckily we still have him to call on. He's still a significant funder of the foundation and a resource that we can call on. And we're looking at something, but so it'll certainly be more than one person. But beyond that, we haven't come to any decisions.
Fair enough. Well, good to catch up with you here, and always good to read this report. It's a phenomenal just snapshot on where we are in the world, especially right now during the pandemic. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.